Hello students, this is Professor Porter here to talk to you today about Florida's path to the present. And as you know, this is chapter 8 in your Florida Uplands book. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, I want to talk to you about how there's so many different species in Southwest Florida, and how did they get here, and what did it take to produce such animal and plant diversity? I think that's very important and very relevant to our class. Can you identify the species below? You probably can. They're pretty familiar. This is the American alligator. This is, in the middle, we've got the Florida panther. And the cute little fellow on the right is a gopher tortoise. All right, let's look at the historic timeline first and foremost. You've probably had this information given to you in a history class at some point, but I want to go over it with you one more time, just so that you're aware of how Florida came to be. First of all, let's start with the universe, and that was 14 plus billion years ago that it came into being. And then about 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth was born. It was created. 3.8 billion years ago, self-replicating molecules came into existence, and that really is the point when most scientists think that life came into being. So 3.5 to 3.8 billion years ago. So 1.3 billion years ago, the first true cells had arose, and then now we're talking about Florida. 550 million years ago, many celled plants and animals were present in the ocean, and Florida was taking shape underwater. Between 35 and 23 million years ago, Florida came into being as a landmass, and I'm going to show you a diagram that's in your book that really depicts it well in just a moment. So we're going to talk about the continental drift first of all. How did Florida get to be where it is today, which is this little nubbin right here? Let's look at 200 million years ago. The Earth was basically what we know it. The land mass was known as Pangea, and it was one single land mass. It was one single continent, and it started to break apart in about 135 million years ago, and it started to break apart into several different land masses. And this was happening because of tectonic plate shift. The Earth is always in motion, and you probably already know that from previous classes, but tectonic plate shift causes the continental drift. And then 35 million years ago, we had what's beginning to look like our present day, but not quite. But as you can see, different continents are certainly aligning with almost where they are present day. And as you can see from this, the outline in red basically shows you where the tectonic plates are, the things that are basically causing the shift. And yes, we are still on the move today. So Florida's debut, approximately 30 to 35 million years ago, a few of Florida's highest parts broke above the surface. And approximately 23 to 25 million years ago, the Panhandle's northern highlands appeared and remained above water. And since then, it has been a single landmass. And let me show you the diagram. This is what's in your book. And just to let you know, when you see the term MYA, that means million years ago. So about 30 million years ago, only a few single islands were above the surface. This is obviously the outline of Florida today. And then 23 million years ago, Florida became the single landmass, like we just described in the last slide. Now, what's interesting is at certain times, Florida has been twice as big as it is today. You can see the outline of what it is today. Well, what would cause that? What do you think would cause that? And it's a pretty simple answer. When we have glaciated periods, when there's a glacier, and it's happened so many times around the planet at certain times, basically water gets caught up in glacial ice, and there's no free flow of water, say, into the Gulf of Mexico, which causes the level to go down. When the level of the water goes down, then you end up with greater landmass. And how is that relevant to what we're talking about? How did all these different species get to be in Florida? Well, basically they came here because of the Great American Interchange. And like I just said, during the Ice Age, water becomes tied up in land ice and seas dramatically fall. And when land expands, so do the routes that animals can follow. And that's what we're talking about, the Great American Interchange. And between ice ages, there are warmer periods, and that's what we're living in right now. We're an in-between ice age period. Kind of interesting to think about. The last ice age peaked about 21,000 years ago and ended about 11,500 years ago. And in regards with Florida, 18,000 years ago, Florida was very dry and the sea level was about 300 feet lower than it is right now, which basically gave us the continental shelf that allowed different animals to come and go freely. And I'll show you a diagram in just a minute, but it gave it animals a much wider range in order to get over to Florida. So around 10,000 years ago, the sea level reached its current state that it's at. So this is the diagram that I was talking about. Obviously the outline in black is our current land mass. So as you can see, everything in green, this is how the interchange opened up. We had all this extra area, which made it a lot easier for wildlife species to basically make their way over to us, and likewise our species to go over to them. This is kind of interesting right here. This is the Panama Canal at the very bottom right hand corner, and that, as you know, is open now. Well, when this happened, when this occurred, this glaciated period, basically it created a land bridge so that all these species could come over. So it's very interesting. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So the arrival of humans, the first band of nomadic hunters migrated from Alaska, actually Asia, Alaska to Florida around 12,000 to 15,000 years ago. And you see different numbers for that. I believe our book might have mentioned 15,000 years ago, but it's definitely in that time frame. So like the plants and animals, people basically became part of the ecosystem. And what's important on this slide is the fact that the Calusa Indians are descendants of these nomadic hunters. And if you grew up in the Naples area, you probably are already familiar with the Calusa, and they were definitely the predominant Indian tribe in Southwest Florida. So they were also called the Shell Indians, and they, for centuries, they accumulated huge shell mounds. They engineered canals, and they sustained tens of thousands of people from fish and shellfish found in the rich estuaries around our area here in Collier County and west and south of Fort Myers. There's lots of different areas, and I'll show you a map exactly of where the Calusa lived in just a moment. And they did not farm like other Indian tribes in Florida. Instead, they made nets from palm tree webbing and caught mullet, pinfish, bigfish, catfish. They used spears to catch eels and turtles. They made fishbone arrowheads to hunt for animals such as deer, but primarily they caught shellfish like conchs, crabs, clams, lobsters, a lot of different things they used for eating. And this is where the shell mounds came from, basically these items. Now, here is the territory of the Calusa. As you can see, this is us in Southwest Florida. We're about right here. And it is primarily the area in the blue. And, I mean, it's a good portion of the state where they were found. There were Seminole Indians also in this area, but they weren't the powerhouse that the Calusas were. So let me tell you about areas where you can find shell mounds. Here in Collier County, there are a couple. There's one on Shell Island Road just south of us, and it's a part of Rookery Bay. And then on Marco Island, there's also Otter Mound, which is really interesting. Now, around the Fort Myers area, we've got a couple of different areas to look at. So, you know, they can be found all over Florida, but this is probably, Mound Key is probably the most renowned in the area, simply because the Calusa chief, Chief Carlos, lived on Mound Key. And this is Estero Bay, and if you didn't know that, and this says Estero Boulevard. If you didn't recognize this already, this is Fort Myers Beach. And here's an interesting fact. There's a bridge that goes from the south end of Fort Myers Beach over to Lover's Key. It is called Big Carlos Pass, and sure enough, it's named after Chief Carlos. So these are two main areas, the Mound Key, and then on Fort Myers Beach there's several places. But right about here is the Mound House, so you can go there and you can see archives of and digs of the Calusa Indians. So one other place I wanted to mention, and this is probably the premier place in Southwest Florida, is Randall Research Center. And visitors, if you go there, it's really worth the trip over there, even though it's far, because it's on Pine Island, and it's a bit of a hike from where we are in Collier County. But visitors to the center can tour the trails, and there's 3,700 feet of trails, and people will take you around. You're not left to walk them by yourself. They actually have tours, and the mounds are big. They're the largest I've seen in Southwest Florida, and they have canals, and just really a great archaeological site for you to see. And let me just tell you, if you are interested in going, let me show you how to get there. From our area, you would go up I-75, over on 78 through Cape Coral, over to Pine Island, and then take a right and you'll see signs for Randall Research Center. And just so you know, this entire area was at one point, I mean, really historically significant for in our area as far as the Calusa and early settlers. So that's it. If you have any questions, we will talk about it in class. I hope you enjoyed this presentation.